Mason Storm by Francis Jones.
Revenge of the Broken. In a world where corruption runs deep and justice is elusive, former Force Recon Marine and CIA assassin Mason Storm is pulled back into the shadows by an old friend, Ron Ketterman. Together, they lead a relentless crusade against a broken system, targeting the powerful elites who believe they are untouchable. As they wage war from the underbelly of a dystopian city, Mason is torn between his brutal past and the possibility of redemption, all while navigating dangerous alliances and his complex relationship with Elena, the woman who holds his heart. Revenge of the Broken is a gritty, action-packed story of vengeance, betrayal, and the quest for a new world order. Chapter 1. Mason Storm. The rain hammered relentlessly against the window, turning the view of the small town below into a fractured, distorted scene. Neon lights flickered weakly through the downpour, casting blurry streaks of color across the wet streets and alleys, while shadows seemed to twist and shift with the constant barrage of water. From his perch in the rundown apartment, Mason Storm watched it all, feeling as disconnected from the world outside as he did from the man he used to be. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of damp wood and lingering cigarette smoke, mixing with the sharp tang of whiskey from the half-empty Jack Daniels bottle resting on the chip table in front of him. The single lamp in the corner did little to push back the darkness, casting a dim, yellowed glow that left most of the room in shadow. Mason leaned back in his worn-out leather chair, the springs groaning beneath him, staring at the cracked ceiling. The rain on the window was a steady background noise, almost calming, though nothing about his life was calm anymore. It hadn't been for years.
He used to think he was invincible. Force Recon Marine, a CIA assassin trained to be the best, to operate in the dark corners of the world where morality and law held no sway. Now, all of that felt like a lifetime ago, a memory blurred by time and violence. He wasn't the man he used to be. He had walked away from that life, disappeared off the grid, slipping into obscurity with the hope that the world would forget about him, just as he had tried to forget about it. But the past never truly lets go. His body bore the scars of the life he had led, each one a reminder of missions gone wrong, of comrades lost, and of a system that had used him like a disposable tool. Now, all he had was the silence. No orders, no targets, no purpose. It was a different kind of prison, one that came with isolation and too much time to think. The days blurred together in a haze of whiskey and regret, punctuated only by fleeting moments of clarity. The same question gnawing at him. What the hell was it all for? The vibration in his pocket snapped him out of the thought. Instinctively, he reached for the burner phone, the one reserved for emergencies, if they could still call it that. Only a select few had the number. His pulse quickened, not with anticipation, but with the sense that whatever came next would force him to face something he wasn't ready for. He glanced at the screen. The name made his gut clench. Ron Ketterman. Shit, Mason muttered, his voice gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in days. He took a long, bitter swig of whiskey, savoring the burn as it slid down his throat before answering.
Ron, he said, his voice low, already bracing himself.
Mason, it's time. I need you back. There's something big, something you can't sit out.
Came the familiar growl on the other end. The words carried weight, pulling Mason deeper into a past he'd sworn he'd left behind. Ron was a name he hadn't heard in years, a former soldier like him, someone who had once been a brother in arms, one of the few people in the world he trusted. But trust only went so far when the world turned upside down. If Ron was reaching out now, it meant trouble.
I'm off the grid for a reason, Ron.
Mason replied, standing and crossing the room to the window, his eyes scanning the rain-soaked streets below, as though they held any answers.
What's so urgent? It can't wait.
It's not the usual bullshit, man. The people we worked for, the CIA, the government, they're the enemy now. I'm talking about taking down the whole goddamn system, and I need you on board.
Mason felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just another mission. This was different. This was personal.
The whole system.
Mason echoed, a dark chuckle escaping his lips.
That's a tall order. What the hell are you planning?
I've seen things, Mace.
Ron's voice hardened.
Things that would make you sick. Corruption. Deeper than either of us ever thought. They're playing God with people's lives, manipulating entire countries. The bastards we used to call our handlers. They're not just running the show, they are the show. We can't stand by anymore. We need to burn it down, from the inside out.
Mason pressed a hand to the cold glass, watching the rain distort his reflection. The faces of the men he'd killed over the years flashed in his mind, each one justified in the name of duty, each one part of the bigger lie. He had known, somewhere deep down, that the system was rotten. The missions that had torn apart countries and destabilized governments for the sake of someone's profit. It had never sat right with him. But back then, he'd told himself it wasn't his place to question orders. Now he wasn't so sure.
This isn't just revenge, Mason. This is about giving the power back. No more governments pulling the strings. No more corporate overlords using us like pawns. We're building something new. Something clean. But I need you with me.
The weight of the offer hung heavy in the air. Mason's hand curled into a fist against the glass, his knuckles white. Could he really turn his skills toward something like this? Toward bringing down the very machine that had made him what he was? The bitterness of his old life surged up, familiar and corrosive.
What's the first step, Ron?
Mason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But the decision was already made. His fingers drummed idly on the edge of the whiskey glass. Tonight,
Ron said, his tone shifting to business.
Meet me at the old docks. We're taking out a high-level target. Corporate executive. Real scumbag. He's been running human trafficking operations, drugs, arms, the works. Untouchable. Because he's paying off the right people. But not tonight. Tonight, we send a message.
Mason's pulse quickened. This wasn't just another hit. This was personal. He felt the old fire stirring in his chest, the rush of adrenaline that he hadn't felt in years, the kind of surge that made him feel alive. The world hadn't just forgotten about him. He'd forgotten about it. But now it was calling him back.
I'll be there, Ron,
he said, ending the call. The docks were drenched in darkness and rain, just like the rest of the town. Though here the shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. Mason moved like a ghost through the maze of rusted shipping containers, his combat instincts as sharp as they'd ever been, his body moving without thought. He spotted Ron leaning against a container, a figure of hardened resolve, every inch the soldier he used to be. His cigarette flared briefly in the gloom as he looked up at Mason's approach.
Didn't think you'd show,
Ron said, exhaling smoke through his nostrils. His voice had an edge to it, but Mason could see the relief in his eyes.
Didn't think you'd still be alive.
Mason shot back, stepping into the shadows beside him.
What's the plan?
Ron's grim smile said more than words. No more small talk, no reminiscing about the old days. They both knew the stakes. They moved as one, slipping through the compound, taking down guards with ruthless efficiency. Mason's hands worked as they always had, fast, silent, deadly. The years might have slowed other men, but Mason's muscles remembered every motion, every kill. He felt alive again, each takedown feeding the fire inside him. For the first time in a long time, he had a purpose, and it tasted sweet. The penthouse was their final destination, an opulent fortress at the top of a sleek high-rise. The executive had surrounded himself with guards, but they were no match for Mason's precision. One by one, they fell, leaving only silence in their wake as Mason and Ron made their way to the top. When they reached the penthouse, the man was waiting for them, panic already seeping into his clean-cut features. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, but the look in his eyes told Mason everything he needed to know.
You don't know who I work for.
The man stammered, backing away as Mason advanced. A cold smile spread across Mason's lips as he drew his pistol and aimed it at the trembling man's head.
Oh, I know exactly who you work for.
He replied in a deep, menacing voice and now pressing the barrel to the man's temple.
And that's why you're dying tonight.
With that, Mason pulled the trigger, and a soft whisper echoed through the room as the bullet pierced through the executive's skull, painting the wall behind him crimson red. The man fell to the floor, lifeless and still, as Mason stood over him, a rush of adrenaline surging through his body. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Ron appeared behind Mason, his expression unreadable.
That's the first of many, Mace.
He said. Mason wiped the blood from his hands, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline, the thrill of taking down someone who deserved it. Maybe Ron was right. Maybe this was what he'd been waiting for all along, a way to use his skills without being someone else's pawn.
Let's burn it all down,
Mason said, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he walked into the night.